Our final segment concerns a leaked document showing that Facebook is unable to comply with the emerging laws on privacy. The title of the April 26th Vice News article told the story. Facebook doesn't know what it does with your data or where it goes. Leaked document. The company Facebook is now officially the company Meta. But as the article indicates, it may be a different name, but it's the same behavior. We know this because an anonymous insider at Facebook leaked an internal analysis of Facebook's handling of data. A key paragraph in the report read as follows. We do not have an adequate level of control and explainability over how our systems use data, and thus we can't confidently make controlled policy changes or external commitments, such as we will not use X data for Y purpose. And yet, this is exactly what regulators expect us to do, increasing our risk of mistakes and misrepresentation. The report was written by the unit charged with running Facebook's advertisement system. And basically, the unit admits they do not know how various systems use the vast trove of information Facebook has on its users and others. The report stated, "We've built systems with open borders. The result of these open systems and open culture is well described with an analogy. Imagine you hold a bottle of ink in your hand. This bottle of ink is a mixture of all kinds of user data, third-party data, first-party data, sensitive categories data, Europe, etc. You pour that ink into a lake of water, our open data systems, our open culture, and it flows everywhere. How do you put that ink back in the bottle? How do you organize it again such that it only flows to the allowed places in the lake?" Treating information in this manner has real-world implications. The article pointed out one example. Facebook was caught sharing the phone numbers that users provided for two-factor authentication with the unit that identifies a user's possible friends. Academic scholars partnered with others to document the practice, and eventually, Facebook stopped it. It doesn't take much imagination to realize that a person might willingly supply their phone number to authenticate themselves, yet be unwilling to have that number used to identify nearby people that they could potentially connect with. This example generalizes. A person might want to list their religion, sexual orientation, political leanings, or hobbies, and still oppose their use in certain algorithms for credit products, vacations, healthcare products, and more. What the leaked document is telling us is that while users may want to be able to limit the way Facebook uses each bit of information, Facebook cannot even figure out how it or its third-party partners are using each bit of information. Because the company does not even know what it is doing, it has limited ability to comply with the requests of individual users or the demands of regulatory bodies. As of December 2021, Facebook had 71,970 full-time employees, up from 150 employees just 15 years ago. And currently, Facebook has a market capitalization of over $558 billion. By any estimation, Facebook has grown fast and is now a very large company. So why the apparent seat of the pants, complete work but don't take time to document it approach you might expect of a single inexperienced computer programmer? Well, sociologically speaking, all businesses have a culture composed of, among other things, regular ways of behaving, norms, stated values, ways of thinking, formal and informal rituals, root metaphors, and more. While each business has its own culture, two or more businesses may have similar cultures. And when multiple companies have similar cultures, it's possible to identify a general kind of culture that has certain characteristics. Czech social scientist Cezary Kwiatkowska identifies characterizations or characteristics of what he terms startup culture. According to Kwiatkowska, one core characteristic of startup culture is a logic of the free flowing of ideas. He states, Free circulation of ideas is one of the main characteristics of startup culture because ideas are regarded to be core ingredients of the company's competitive advantage. Now, in endeavoring to assure that communication flows freely, companies with a startup culture may heighten informal communication channels. One fact sociologists of culture have established is that an ethos appropriate to one kind of activity can easily leak into other activities. For example, startup culture holds informal conversations in high regard since, as Kwiatkowski indicates, quote, they promote the fluid exchange of information owing to the absence of any formal barriers, unquote. While that posture may facilitate internal communication, it can morph into a resistance to formal barriers and formality in general. Externally, startups have traditionally chafed against the formalities with which many mainstream organizations operate. For example, Finnish sociologist Henri Koskinen noted that startups see their chance of success as intimately tied to their ability to change their business model on the fly, as expected opportunities are found to be dead ends and new opportunities emerge. He writes, quote, the practices of startups are inappropriate for the requirements of the institutional funding bodies. For example, demanding a traditional business plan from the startup is often pointless, as the plan of a startup is prone to change, and therefore, quote, writing down all ideas to produce a lengthy business plan is most often a waste of time. Now, it's one thing to use an incomplete business plan to secure funding. You can easily tell the funder that this is the general outline, but you will be seeking out emerging opportunities. It's quite another for the core activities of the business to be so flexible that documentation of those procedures is incomplete, insufficient, or perhaps even non-existent. The management of information is the core of Facebook's business. Each piece of information has, among other things, one or more sources, one or more legal constraints on use, one or more legal penalties associated with misuse, one or more socio-ethical imperatives, and more. Throwing all the information into the pot, the lake, in a way that prevents responsible management in line with legal and socio-ethical constraints and penalties is consistent with the informality of startup culture. But you might say, Facebook hasn't been a startup for decades. Why hasn't it altered its culture as it has grown? Perhaps Facebook's early cultures linger in honor of another sociological fact. The early culture of a company can exert powerful effects on the company for years. The company's culture is entailed in its standard operating procedures, its understanding of itself, its stated values, its driving metaphors, and more. It's deeply embedded in the engagement and the activities of the organization. Those are not easy aspects to dislodge or otherwise change. And this is just a reference that indeed culture is not easy to change. One of the few ways to get a culture to change is to change the incentives in the environment. In that connection, note that authors of the leaked internal report, written last year, sought to warn Facebook that it must move quickly to attain the ability to monitor and control the use of data in-house and with its third-party vendors. Else, it will run afoul of emerging regulation. The leaked document and this news report that shared it with the world suggests that Facebook has not acted quickly. We can imagine all sorts of reasons for delay. Maybe in Facebook's analysis, it is too big to be regulated. Maybe Facebook believes it can engage politicians to ward off regulation. Maybe Facebook is just not confident enough to move quickly on privacy when they have such a complex set of data and such a vast trove. Those are all possible reasons, but another reason may be more fundamental. Facebook just may be trapped by its startup culture. Its culture may have served it well when it was run out of a dorm room in Cambridge, but a culture that, unless radically changed, may continue to bring it increasing liabilities and user dissatisfaction from now on. That's This Week in Sociological Perspective. We'll be back next week with another interview with an author of some important sociological research and more sociological insights on an issue in the news. Till then, take care.